welcome back to another episode of The Faith Journey. The last couple of episodes, I never even introduced myself, so apologies for that. My name is Camilla, and yeah, I'm just really glad that you're here and that you're listening. And how have your weeks been? I wish that this was like an actual conversation that I could have like live. I hope you've had a good week. I feel like my week has been quite nice. I've had some slightly more intense like weeks and just a bit more of an intense period at work. And this week felt a lot more kind of calm and relaxed. Yeah, just slowing down a little bit and enjoying my day. Yeah, it's Saturday today. I've had a pretty okay day, I would say. I went to play tennis, which was really fun. I haven't been playing tennis for long, but there's something to doing new things when you're an adult for the sake of enjoying them. Like, I'm not, planning on being a professional tennis player, but it's just for enjoyment. And so, yeah, that's been something that I've been doing and very much enjoying. So highly recommend starting a hobby or a sport from scratch, quote unquote, and just, for the enjoyment of it. I've also, at the same time, I don't know why, after I came back from tennis and then I had lunch and then, as I was cooking lunch and like as I was getting ready, I started to get all these lies in my head. Yeah, not particularly loving being in my body on this day. And I was really close to not filming and like not recording this, but I'm always like checking if this thing is on, but it is. I've learned now. So it's been a interesting morning, and like all these lights sometimes that come into my head, as I said, was very close not recording. We're not doing that, I want to talk about this topic today, and me sharing this is just to kind of say, if you're also not having a particularly good day, then you're not alone. And it's actually been, before like pressing the record button, I was just reminding myself like, no, we're not doing this anymore. I'm not listening to these things, these like voices and things that I just hear in my head. They're not from God. They are not strengthening me. They are not encouraging. They are not from God. These lies about like how I look and my appearance and me being fat, me not being good and worthy and pretty enough, and all these terrible things, and like not having worth enough. All these things that like come to the surface, just being like, no, I am choosing today to remind myself that that is not what God thinks of me. And so I have the power, because of God, to not believe in those things and to remind myself of who God says I am. And it's a journey, and I've been learning about it, about my identity in Christ and what that means. But this is not the topic of today's conversation, but it's kind of linked because I really wanted to talk about idols. And I think there's definitely a connection there, at least for me. I just wanted to be authentic and transparent in saying that this conversation and these things I'll be talking about are very much a reminder for myself in this moment as well. So why don't we just jump straight into it? Talking about idols is not easy, I think. It's a very big topic, but I feel just called to talk about it because it held me captive for so long. It still kind of creeps in, and then it makes me lose perspective of how I'm living and what I'm devoting my time and my resources and my whole sort of being towards. Also, why don't you grab yourself a cup of tea or a coffee or some nice water, just something, a little something, as if we're just having a conversation together. So, cheers. I think it's probably good to start by just talking a little bit about what idols actually are, because to be honest, before coming to faith, I never really heard the word, or like I heard the word idol, but in a kind of a different context, and I definitely never really utilized it. And I knew what it meant, but when I started sort of reading the Bible and then, putting my faith in Jesus, it just suddenly made so much sense to me. And I could really kind of apply it to my day and to what I was struggling with. And so I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here, but I looked up the definition of idol, and the Merriam-Webster dictionary says an idol is an object of extreme devotion, a representation or symbol of an object of worship, a false conception. And so it's something that is the subject of our worship, of our attention, of our devotion, right? Once I got to know Jesus and I started to build my relationship with God, he really started to become the pillar of my life. And he started to really change my heart from the inside out. And in response to this love, I started to realize that I was and I am sort of changing the way I live and the way I conduct myself to please God, and for my life and my day-to-day to be an act of worship and devotion to him, essentially. Now, glorifying God, which basically means giving him, the praise and the gratitude that he deserves because of all the love that he gives us, is such an important aim to kind of keep striving towards. But it also means that we, I think, sometimes have to carry out an audit, and that's definitely what I have to do and what I've had to do, and continuously am doing this, just carrying out an audit and kind of asking God to reveal to me, what is it that I'm still placing above you, Lord? And idols, in brief, are anything that we place above Jesus. Anything that takes my attention and your attention away from him. Anything that distracts us. Anything that makes us conform to the patterns and all these standards of the world. That is an idol, and the way I've experienced idols. And the thing about idols as well that I've learned is that what they do is that they keep us trapped. They keep us trapped from realizing all of the goodness that is on offer for us through Jesus. And the definition before actually says, what was it? It says an object of extreme devotion, meaning that it keeps us trapped in this. And so idols are not just something that sometimes, as I said, gets our attention, but it's those things that are, those thoughts, those things that are persistent, that we feel like we can't live without. And they are extreme, and their impacts are extreme as well. This is why idols are sort of considered a sin. I want to use this word carefully. I know for some people this might bring up a lot, like this word sin. And I think I never really heard the word sin much. So I have a pretty neutral, I would say, relation to it. I was a little bit scared about it because on one hand, it is scary. Like idols are sins, and sins are scary because they take us away from the love of God. They distract us. And that is so scary, like not being in connection with God and kind of losing that perspective. A sin is something that grieves God, right? And that keeps us at a distance from him. So like literally what we've been saying, idols, for instance. So that's why I want to use the word sin. And so the fact that idols keep us far and distracted from God is exactly what the Bible actually warns us about. And it's why we need to be so careful as to where we might have, accidentally perhaps given into them and allowed them to very sneakily kind of creep into our life to such an extent that then we don't really see any other way of behaving or any other way of thinking, right? We just attach to these thoughts and to these sort of conditions and to these idols because we've lost perspective of what truly matters and of who God calls us to be. I also want to give examples of idols. So we said anything that distracts us, right? Anything that we place above God. And those can be anything. It's a very subjective thing. What is it that you personally are perhaps placing above God. And I know for me, for instance, it's a perfect body, it's attention from people, it's pride, and it's very, I'm really exposing myself here, but those are idols. Those are all things that I've been putting above God my whole life. But they can also be things like success or things like money or, any sort of like material thing as well. So there's so many different idols, popularity, like so many different things. And they will be very much subjective to our individual being. And I want to jump straight into the Bible and into a book that really kind of introduced me to the concepts of idols. And that book is Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is a book of the Old Testament that has taught me a lot about, as I said, idols, and really started as this whole kind of aha moment and process of realizing the idols that I still had and that I still kind of am really working towards releasing. And in chapter 4, Moses is speaking to the Israelites that basically had been sort of set free, right, from slavery in Egypt, and that are about to then enter the promised land. And Moses goes on to encourage them and into basically obedience to the Lord's commandments, urging them to not repeat the same mistakes that their older sort of generations had made. And in the passage that I want to read, that I found really useful to explain this and to understand this, and also to understand like the consequences and the gravity of them, is chapter 4 verse 15 and 16. And he goes on to say, "Therefore, watch yourselves very carefully, so that you do not become corrupt and make for yourselves an idol, an image of any shape, whether formed like a man or a woman or like any animal on earth or any bird that flies in the air." And here he's basically saying, be careful that you don't start making idols out of the things that are in God when you then enter the promised land. Watch yourselves very carefully, which I thought was interesting. If he says very carefully, he wouldn't say this if it wasn't so easy for idols to really slip into our lives and to infiltrate our lives and to corrupt, the way in which we want to live, spreading the love right, of God that overflows from the Father through Jesus. And so Moses is really saying, just be careful. Like when we live in, even now, this world that we're in, especially I think in the West, right? If this is, I don't know where you're listening from, but yeah, the world just glorifies all different things like a perfect, skinny body or a top job or great wealth and just more and more and more things until you completely forget about God, or even until he just even stops being the person that drives us forward. Because what is it that is making you strive forward? Is it financial abundance in order to bless the people around you, to bring positive change, to be generous and so on? Or is it to go places, quote unquote, in the world and to get richer and richer and sort of self-propel this idol of the self? And as I was reflecting on this and writing myself a few notes before, just before coming on here, the self, I realized that the self is honestly probably an idol in itself, and probably the one that is at the root of all of the other idols that I've mentioned. This sort of obsession with the self that we have in our society. It's my career, it's my money, it's my appearance, it's mine. I think that is such a driver. What if life isn't about me, and isn't about just us individually, but it's about the way we interact in the world to really serve others and then to serve God? Now that's how you start to dethrone idols. The very first commandment that Moses gives the Israelites, and that is in Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 7, you shall have no other gods before me. Meaning, again, that there's no other status or no other thing that we should place above the one true God, above the Lord, right? That in ancient sort of Hebrew was the name Yahweh, which was kind of revealed to Moses in the book of Exodus. And a bit later as well in Deuteronomy. Honestly, this book has so much on idols. And it's quite a big book. So I've been spending quite a long time in it. But chapter 32, Moses goes on and he shares a song. And the lyrics of this song in verse 17, they say, they sacrificed to false gods, which are not God. Gods they are not known, gods that recently appeared, gods your ancestors did not fear. And for context, here Moses is still talking to the Israelites, and in particular to those that were from kind of the second generation of Israelites. And he's essentially warning them of what their ancestors had done. And what struck me in this verse is that where he says, in gods that recently appeared, gods your ancestors did not fear, there's just something about that stood out to me. And I think certain idols like beauty or success and so on, they have always been, I think, part of like older and previous generations sort of struggles. But I feel like, especially if you are alive today and you're listening to this, and maybe you're in your mid sort of 20s, 30s, even 40s and so on, down to, teenagers as well, I feel like they've intensified somehow, and for so many different reasons. But it just really makes me think about how I don't want to participate in the creation of new intensified idols that will be my legacy and that will, affect my children and then the generations to come as well. So, yeah, as much as idols often affect us individually, and that's how we feel, their effect in our day-to-day lives, especially, they're actually in full play in so many people's lives, and our individual resistance to them, dethroning them, can have such a lasting impact on so many people's lives. It's even the lives, of the people that surround us in our daily circles, as well as that radically sort of changing the narrative that we live in. And I think there's so much power in that. There is so much power in that. And I also want to make kind of clear here that I don't think there's, nothing inherently negative about, for instance, financial abundance, right? About maybe striving to have a really strong body or to have a great job or to be married or whatever it might be. It's just the moment we put our worth in those titles instead of the most important title of all, which is that of a loved daughter, of a loved son or child of God, that's when these become idols. And when we remove these idols in our lives, we will then realize that we don't need to prove our worth to the world and then live in this constraints of all these expectations and all these standards that we have in society, from, beauty to wealth to relationship status, because God is He's so pleased with us. His love is so great for us that there is no gene size, there's no paycheck, there's no car or house that would make you be more or less loved by God. And this is something that when it clicked in my head and in my heart, it's that thing that even just speaking it out loud now is making me feel so much lighter. I started the episode saying I'm struggling today a little bit with these lies in my head, but I feel the authority. I feel the authority that is present in knowing Jesus and in knowing that that is not a narrative that I want to live in, and that is not the narrative that I choose, right? That is not my identity. That is not my title anymore. And it's a process, and I'm learning, and I don't, my prayer is just that this becomes like deeply, deeply, deeply rooted to the point where it will be automatic. Like what I just said will be automatic and will come out in, 2 seconds, not even. As soon as I hear like these lies and these things coming up, it's training ourselves to hold these thoughts and not let them affect the truth of who God says we are and what it means to be his children. And it's out of this love, it's out of this, the love of God and just his support and his grace that we decide to live in what is called holiness, which is just basically what brings honor to God. And that's like a whole other topic of conversation that I've been exploring, and it's been such a beautiful journey. But I think there's something, I think the two are really, really linked. As I shared at the beginning, idolatry is something that I know a little bit too well for my liking, to be honest. And it's one of those sins that I'm like constantly sort of fighting against, and that if I'm not aware of it will very sneakily come back into my thought patterns. And it's that thing that kept me going further and further and further down into darkness in my most difficult days, when I completely lose perspective, when I didn't know my identity in Christ. And I'm learning, as I said, I'm still learning about this, and I'm struggling some days more than others. But I shared at the start how the word idol didn't really have like much of a meaning for me in the past. But as I sort of kept reading the Bible and as I grew in my relationship with Jesus, it started to just be so clear which were the idols that had crept in to my life and were ruling my life and my mind, where I was putting my worth in and how I was behaving. And if you've heard my story and my journey to faith, you know that eating disorders and obsessive thoughts and like behaviors and so on are very much part of it. And I didn't press into this, then, but all of these, from over-exercising to sort of obsessively caring about the size and the shape of my body, to seeing very, very, very little value in my life if it wasn't for what I had to offer to please others and to please society, stemmed all from idols. And that is the connection. When I made that connection, things changed. Idols are the consequences of having these false standards and pressures of the world, the lies of the enemy, as the guiding lines of my life. And their consequences for me were mental illness, separation, anger, competition, pride, bitterness, and just so on, right? And, fill the blank with what your experience has been. So basically, all that God isn't, all that God, calls us to step away from. And it's honestly very confronting. Why am I really going to the gym? Or why are you serial dating when you don't want to? Or why are you sort of slaving away at a job that is making you maybe a little bit sick inside and unhappy? Well, because, once I get abs, then I'll be worthy of love. And once I get this job, then I'll be successful. And once I get married, then I will be lovable. And these are all like things that I'm just saying because they're things that I've heard in my head. And I don't want to project anything, but I have a sense that I'm not the only one, right? Just hearing the conversations that people have, don't get it twisted. I'm like very much with you in this, as I shared literally at the beginning. But I feel like today in particular is actually such a good example of like, I feel like these lies are in my head, but it's a day where I feel strong, where I thank God because I just cling to his strength, and I just ask the Holy Spirit to like pour out again in me and give me the strength to remind myself of who I am, right? And to the idols, I'm not, committed to anymore. I'm just here to say no, like no to all of these things that I just listed out. Let's snap out of this. And there was another point in Deuteronomy 4:31, I think. Let me go back. Deuteronomy 4:31 reads, "For the Lord your God is a merciful God. He will not abandon you or destroy you or forget the covenant with your ancestors, which he confirmed to them by oath." So this verse, when I read it, it's a reminder, that even when we are caught up in sin, in idolatry, the Lord your God is a merciful God. The first thing that I sort of did, and that is also part of dethroning idols and choosing not to live in this narrative anymore, it's repenting, which basically just means apologizing and acknowledging where I was caught in this sin, in this idolatry, and in this idol, and where I had made an idol of something. And let's ask Jesus to remind us of our inherent worth that we have because of him. And as we stay in him and as we are guided by the Spirit, we then dethrone these idols of our present day. And so then we choose every day. I choose every day, and it's challenging, but it's a choice that we have. We have the power to choose every day to live our life in a way that redefines our priority. I wake up and I'm like, Lord, I decide, I choose today to live in a way that redefines my priorities and re-gears my life and my priorities in direction of you. And I literally pray this, and I just ask God, to give me the strength to walk in this freedom, to remind me, and to, let's ask God to remind us of the truth of what God says in the Bible, not just when we are like in the thick of it, but also when we're starting to feel like a little bit unrooted and a little bit ungrounded. So we don't have to be, in the thick of having like the worst day. I mean, in those moments, definitely, go back and have that conversation with the Lord. But even when we just catch ourselves having these thoughts, go back, say, I'm sorry, Lord. I'm sorry, Lord. Have mercy, give me the strength, and I choose to walk in this new identity that you've given me. And I also want to say again that I'm not by any means sitting here being like, yeah, like I figured it all out and I don't struggle with this anymore. This was my old, like my old sin and whatever. And as much as I don't live in that story anymore, and that is what I'm committed to, I'm still making the decision to choose a different story. And it's not easy. It's very challenging. I personally find this quite challenging. My prayer is literally every day, just like, Lord, help me walk in your freedom every day, just reminding me in every moment of every day how to be someone who isn't overcome by all these thoughts and by all these distractions, but someone who is kind, someone who is generous, someone who is just so driven by your love and not by worldly attachments and superficial standards. I don't want that to be my life anymore. And so asking ourselves, these questions, as I said, can be really hard and really confronting as well, and can bring up fear. For me, it's honestly the fear of not being accepted, of not being loved, of being alone. And being a little bit vulnerable here, but that's when we sort of go and remind ourselves that we don't do it alone. Like this thing that we're doing, this act of choosing, we're not doing it alone ever, because we do it with Jesus. He's like with us, right? And I've talked about this in the past episode as well, but he knows exactly what our heart is struggling with. And he's just waiting, for me and for you to call him into this struggle. Let me take another sip of tea. Yeah, I feel like there's just so much that I could go on and talk about. There's so much that I'm yet to discover. But we're not doing it alone, you know. We've got Jesus that's giving us the strength to choose to live a different story, to not be enslaved by these idols. And maybe, you know, after you listen to this episode, you just want to have a moment. Just bring yourself to God and just ask Him, like, Lord, reveal to me, what is it that I've been putting above you? And what have I made an idol of? Maybe without you even realizing it. Or maybe you know. Maybe from, you know, you're listening to this because you know that there's an idol that is part of your life at the moment and that you know is not serving you in any way, shape, or form. And I know that it's so scary to go against that and against the narrative, the mainstream narrative of the world. But that's when you call on God, and that's when you decide to walk with Jesus and be free. That is, you know, once you let go of that, He'll be so proud and he'll be so delighted. And it's challenging. It's so challenging. And it's a daily commitment. It really is a daily commitment, multiple times a day. Like in a day like today, multiple times a day. And today's been like a mild day. You know, I feel like I'm still here, I'm showing up. There's days where it's definitely so much harder, you know, where I doubt myself a lot and I question myself. But there's one thing that's true, and that is that there's a God that loves us. There's a God that died for us, to have access to His love, and for us to be able to walk in a different story. And that is a truth that doesn't change. That's a truth that doesn't, you know, isn't more true if we're having a great day or if we're feeling great about something. You know, it's the truth every day, always, and forever. And so, yeah, how are you doing? I really wish that I could that you were just there, you know, and we could just have this conversation like this. But I'm generally really hopeful that, you know, this conversation, as challenging and you know, maybe it hit like a soft spot somewhere. I would love to know, you know, maybe leave me a comment in whatever it's called, like on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, just a comment, or you can send me a DM. There's the podcast's Instagram. I have a personal Instagram as well. They're all linked below. But I think this is probably a good point for me to stop. Yeah, wow, this was a very good reminder for me as well. Sometimes talking things out, writing things down is such a good thing. It helps me so much to remind myself of these truths. I just hope that you've enjoyed listening to this. I hope it's coherent. I was babbling a little bit. As I said, I know this can be a convicting topic and it may have sort of hit some tender spots, but I just want to say that this is meant to be encouraging, not condemning in any way. If you're feeling condemned right now, that is not from God. That is not the intention of this podcast, of this conversation. Just ask the Lord, Lord, help me to remove this idol from my life. Lord, show me where I've made idols. And He will. He's done it for me. And He's doing it every day because I feel it and I know it. And I'm like, oh, okay, I know, I hear you. I want to end this episode by just going and praying. Yeah, so Deuteronomy 31:6 is a beautiful verse, such a beautiful verse. And if any of this was challenging to you, and if you're hurting right now, you are scared of challenging these things and letting go of the things that are sort of controlling you. My prayer to you for this upcoming week, for today, that you may be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. All right. Thank you so much for listening to another episode, if you've made it all the way here. And I'm just sending you, loads of warmth and loads of love as always. And I will see you again on another episode of The Faith Journey. Bye.